A girl was sitting on a subway late at night when she noticed the woman sitting across from her was staring at her intently. The woman was sitting between two old men. The girl kept looking away, but the woman wouldn't break eye contact with her. The stare was beginning to freak the girl out. At the next stop, a new passenger got on, and it was a tall man wearing a trench coat. He then sat down next to the girl, and the woman paid no attention to the man in the trench coat. And she just kept looking at the girl, who was getting more and more creeped out as time went on. The two men didn't even glance in her direction. She pretended not to notice, but every time she glanced at the strange woman, the stare continued. When the train was pulling into the next stop, the man in the trench coat got up to leave, but suddenly he grabbed the girl's arm tightly, and as the doors opened, he dragged her off the train. The doors shut and the subway pulled off, leaving the girl alone with the man in the trench coat. She started screaming out loud, begging for help, but the man in the trench coat then said, "Calm down, I just saved your life. I didn't mean to scare you, but I had to get you off that train." The woman sitting opposite of you was dead, and the two men beside her were holding up her body. There was a woman named Mary who had a 19-month-old baby girl. She loved her baby deeply and couldn't wait for her to say her first words. One night when Mary was cooking dinner, her husband called her out into the living room. He told her that their daughter was trying to say something. Mary was so excited and watched her daughter try and say something. After the baby mumbled for a bit, she said, "Mommy dies." Mary looked at her husband in complete confusion, thinking she heard the baby wrong. But by the confused look on his face too, he heard the same exact thing. Mary and her husband then laughed it off and went on with their night. The next morning, when Mary was on her way to work, she got into a fatal car accident. She was then rushed to the hospital where her husband and daughter were waiting for her. When Mary's husband and her daughter found out the room Mary was in, they went in. Her husband was devastated and didn't know what to do. He couldn't imagine living life without his wife. But suddenly, Mary's daughter pointed at her and said, "Mommy dies." Seconds later, Mary's heartbeat stopped as she died from her injuries from the car crash. There was a 3-year-old boy who lived in a village in Israel, and he was born with a red birthmark on his forehead. As soon as the boy was old enough to talk, he told his family that he had lived before. He pointed to his birthmark and said that he had been murdered with an axe. The boy's parents then took him to the village that he claimed he had lived before. Once there, they met with the village elders. The boy said he remembered his old name, and it was the name of a man who had gone missing from the village 4 years before. The boy also showed them the house he lived in and knew the name of the man who killed him. When the boy saw the man, he walked up to him and said, "I used to be your neighbor. We had a fight and you killed me with an axe." The man's face turned white, and the boy then said, "I even know where he buried my body." The boy took them all to a field and stopped in front of a pile of stones. They then removed the stones and discovered a skeleton underneath. There was a wound to the skull in the exact same place of the boy's birthmark. The boy also showed everybody where the axe was buried too. After this overwhelming evidence against the man then broke down crying and confessed to the murder. One night, a girl named Ava wanted her friends to sleep over. She asked her parents, but they said no. Ava begged and begged, but her parents weren't changing their minds. Ava was extremely mad and then said to her parents, "I wish you both were dead," and then ran off to her room. That night when she was sleeping, she had a dream her parents died in a car crash. Ava was devastated. She then woke up screaming and sweating. She felt terrible for what she said to her parents earlier and went to their room to wake them up, but they were not there. She began to panic and look around, but she couldn't find them anywhere in the house. She then heard footsteps coming from downstairs and she ran down to see, only to find a man holding a big bloody butcher's knife with her mom and dad lying dead behind him, cut open. Ava screamed and tried to run, but the man caught her. He was way too strong and fast for her. Ava was crying and screaming and couldn't believe her mom and dad were dead. The man then looked at Ava and said, "I was hiding in your house today. I heard you say to your parents, 'I wish you were dead.' So I granted your wish. Remember, little girl, be careful what you wish for." A woman named Kelly was on a business trip for 3 days, and she was excited to see her kid and husband. But when Kelly got home, the only one waiting for her was her kid. Kelly then asked where Daddy was, and her kid said upstairs with a girl. Kelly immediately got a pit in her stomach. She walked up the stairs slowly and opened their bedroom door. Her husband was in there with another woman. Kelly began to scream and cry, and her husband tried to explain himself. But she wasn't listening at all. In a fit of rage, Kelly went downstairs and grabbed a knife from the kitchen. She then made her way back upstairs and stabbed her husband countless times. The other woman in the room was shocked and lost for words. Kelly then pointed the knife at her and said, "You're next." But the woman then said, "Wait, he wasn't cheating on you. He thought you weren't going to be home until tomorrow, and I'm a party planner. He hired me to set up a party for you." She then showed Kelly the idea her husband had. Kelly then dropped the knife and couldn't believe what she just did. She then went downstairs and grabbed her kid. Kelly then made her way to the car and drove off with her kid. To this day, Kelly has yet to be found. There was a famous author named David, and he wrote multiple best-selling horror novels. He was praised for plot twists and surprise endings. He received large amounts of fan mail every single day, and many other authors sent him manuscripts in hopes that they would get their work published. But David took pleasure in stealing the ideas from amateur writers. If he came across a manuscript with a great idea for a story, he would use it in his own books and deny the author any credit. One day, David got a manuscript, and as he read the first chapter, he felt he knew how it was going to end. He continued reading, and as he got to the last chapter, he noticed the pages were stuck together. And anxious to finish the story, he pulled the pages apart. David felt increasingly tired, but still wanted to finish the story. When David finished, the ending was exactly what he thought. He then made a mental note to steal the story. But suddenly, David noticed a note from the author saying this: "I knew you were going to steal this story. You did it to me before and blacklisted me from the whole industry and ruined my career and life. And now I'm going to get my revenge." You had to pull the pages apart to read, didn't you? Are you feeling tired? That's normal. It's one of the symptoms of arsenic poisoning. Soon your heartbeat will get slower and slower until it stops forever. Goodbye, David. Some twist endings can be very hard to predict. There were two brothers who lived in a small apartment with their parents on the outskirts of the city. There wasn't a lot of space, so the brothers shared a room. One night, their parents went to visit relatives who lived in the country, and the one brother stayed out late that night with his friends. When he got home, it was already past midnight. He didn't want to wake up his brother who was sleeping, so he didn't turn on the light and he took off his clothes super quietly. As he was getting into bed, he heard his brother groan and ask for a glass of water. He then went to the kitchen and got his brother a glass of water and gave it to him. He then said goodnight and got into bed. At 6 a.m., the brother was woken up by knocking at the door. He got out of bed and went to the door. When he opened the door, standing there was his brother. He then asked, "Where were you?" And his brother said he stayed the night at his girlfriend's house. He then asked, "So you didn't come home last night?" And his brother replied, "No." Suddenly, his heart started to pound. He ran to the bedroom and turned on the light. His brother's bed was empty, and there was an empty glass next to his bed. There was a kid named Mike who loved bowling, and he bowled all the time. One day, Mike went bowling and he brought his friend with him. It was very late, and when they got there, there was nobody there, except one man who was bowling all the way down at the end of the lanes. Mike and his friend then got their shoes and balls and began walking over to their lane. Mike's friend then said he had to use the bathroom and said it'll be quick. Mike was then waiting for his friend for a couple of minutes when he realized they were the only ones at the bowling alley now. The man all the way at the end left. He then got extremely happy because the whole place was for him and his friend now. But 20 minutes then went by and Mike's friend was still not back from the bathroom. Mike then went to the bathroom to check on his friend, but he wasn't there. Mike then came out of the bathroom and noticed the man from before was back. And he was bowling with something that did not look like a ball. Mike then walked closer, and as he got a closer look, he almost passed out. He realized that the man was bowling with his friend's decapitated head. This is the elevator game. This game is a ritual of Korean origin and apparently allows you to go to other dimensions and contact spirits. I don't recommend trying it. The requirements to play the game are a building with an elevator and at least 10 floors. Also, you have to be alone in the elevator. To start the game, you have to be in the elevator on the first floor. Then press the button for the 4th floor. Then, once you reach the 4th floor, press the button for the 2nd floor. Then, when you reach the 2nd floor, press the button for the 6th floor. After this, press the button for the 2nd floor, and after that, the 10th floor. Finally, hit the button for the 5th floor. When you reach the 5th floor, a mysterious woman is supposed to appear. She will try and get your attention, but the rules of the game say you have to ignore her. After, press the button for the 1st floor, and if the elevator takes you to the 10th floor, this means you've done it correctly, and when the doors open, you will be in another dimension, and it could be a very peaceful one or a very, very dangerous one. There was a lunch lady named Judy, and everyone loved her, but they loved her food even more. Every single day, the kids would rush to the lunchroom just to eat her delicious food, but one day, a boy in 7th grade noticed something strange. In the back of the kitchen, he saw a mysterious door he had never seen before, and he's been buying lunch for a year straight. He then went to the principal's office and told him what he saw. The principal then made his way down to the lunchroom and asked Judy about the door. She obviously played dumb for a little bit, but eventually showed him. And what he saw inside made him freeze in absolute horror. Inside were multiple teenagers' dead bodies, completely cut up and strung up on the wall. Judy then looked at the principal with a smile on her face and said, "How do you think my food tastes so good? This is the reason why." Judy was fired and arrested and is now serving 105 years in prison. The school and all the students were disgusted when they found out about what happened, and they couldn't believe they have been eating human meat for this long. Granny Keeley experienced a devastating car crash in 2006. She was a passenger in a car that lost control after skidding on black ice, which resulted in hitting a wall. Granny's knees were then propelled into her face due to her knees being propped up on the dashboard. The impact happened when the airbag inflated at a staggering 200 miles per hour, resulting in very extreme facial injuries. Almost every single bone in her face was broken and she suffered a brain leak. Following the crash, Granny went through many medical procedures, and due to an infection, doctors had to remove her forehead, leaving her without one for 2 years. However, in 2009, surgeons were able to reconstruct her face by fitting it with a ceramic forehead. Today, Granny is 39 years old, and it looks like she didn't even go through any of this. This should be a reminder to everybody to never put your feet up on the dashboard, because something like this could happen to any of us. Octavio da Silva was a 29-year-old soccer referee in Brazil, and on June 30th, 2013, he was refereeing a soccer game and sent off a player named Josmir Santos Abreu, who was 31. He refused to leave the field and began a fight with Octavio. Abreu threw a punch which made Octavio draw a knife from his pocket and repeatedly stabbed Abreu with it. Abreu died on the way to the hospital, and when fans watching the soccer game, including Abreu's family and friends, found out about his death, they invaded the field and stoned Octavio to death, before decapitating him and then ripping his limbs from his body with just their strength and no weapons. They then put his head on a stick in the middle of the field. This whole situation is just awful, and just imagine being ripped limb by an angry group of soccer fans, and there's literally nothing you can do as they pull your body apart. I can't imagine this happening, and what a terrible, terrible death. "18-year-old Nikki Castoris was driving her dad's Porsche 911 on Halloween in 2006. She was driving reckless and fast, going over 100 miles per hour. She then tried to switch lanes at this speed and suddenly clipped another car and lost control. She then flew over the middle of the highway onto traffic lanes and into a concrete toll booth. When the police arrived, they walked into a complete nightmare. They arrived minutes later and found Nikki's body still strapped to the driver's seat, but her head, however, was no longer attached to it. Nikki's head was completely severed in half, and it wasn't a head anymore. The wreckage and the scene were so brutal that the coroner wouldn't let her parents identify her body. Unfortunately, her parents were not spared from seeing the gruesome scene. Photographs of Nikki's body somehow found their way onto the internet and spread quickly. Nikki's parents received countless emails of the photographs, and there was no escaping the trauma. This case should be an eye-opener to everyone not to drive reckless because this can happen to any of us. In 1991, 20-year-old Kelty Byrne worked at a place called Sealand of the Pacific. Here, animals were bred in captivity or captured from the wild. And one day, there was a show involving 3 orca whales and Kelty was a part of the show. Kelty was on the edge of the pool and accidentally tripped in. She tried to swim out, but one of the orcas grabbed her and began to drag her around the pool. Then the 3 orca whales started tossing Kelty around like a toy. They would drag her deep under to the point where she was kinda drowning and then just bring her back up. Kelty was screaming, "I don't want to die," but there was nothing anyone could do. They were outmatched by 3 whales. This went on for some time and Kelty was essentially being tortured by 3 orca whales. They kept dragging her underneath the water, throwing her in the air and pulling on her like dogs playing tug of war. Eventually, the whales brought her deep under the water and she drowned to death. They weren't able to get Kelty's body for 2 to 3 hours, and when they did, it was completely covered in bruises and bite marks. In 2015, 68-year-old Dennis Antiporic left a note for his family saying he was going to the saunas in the community condominiums, which he used a lot to treat his chronic medical conditions. Once in there, he cranked up the heat and sat down to relax. This is where things went wrong. The timer inside the sauna was broken and the heating coil was malfunctioning, causing the temperature to rise extremely quickly to unsafe levels. Because of this temperature, Dennis collapsed and was unable to escape the sauna. After a few hours, his family realized that Dennis still hasn't returned. So his daughter Laura went down to the sauna to check on her father. Upon entering the sauna, she mistook her father for a dark-skinned man, so she exited the sauna. She then found her father's clothes on the counter and realized the dark-skinned man was actually her father. Help was called, but it was too late. Dennis passed away from asphyxiation, and his skin was broiled as if it was jerky. His daughter was even quoted saying, "His face felt worse than a dried piece of beef jerky." In 2017, Jacob Ohl was walking along train tracks with earbuds on when he suddenly sensed but didn't hear a train approaching from behind him. Jacob was at least 1,000 feet away from the train when the conductor first saw him. But they did not ring the train's bell, blow the train's horn, or apply the emergency brake before hitting Jacob. The train hit Jacob, resulting in the train severing both of his legs below the knee. Jacob then acted quickly, and despite both of his legs being severed and in an insane amount of pain, he immediately called 911 and remained completely calm while providing crucial information that saved his life. It also took the train a half mile to come to a complete stop after hitting Jacob. Jacob filed a lawsuit and claimed the CSX train did not put up fencing or other warning devices to keep pedestrians a safe distance from the tracks. This situation is just insane, and I can't believe despite both of his legs being severed, he managed to still call 911 and save his own life. He may never have legs again, but at least he still has a life to live. There was a man named Igor Yefimov who was a Russian airport worker, and one day something awful happened. As Igor was preparing flight Air Astana 737 for takeoff by either loading luggage onto the plane or guiding its direction, he accidentally was standing too close to the plane's engine when it suddenly sucked him up and killed him instantly. His entrails and bits of his body were then shot all over the runway. The flight was then cancelled and all the passengers were onboarded and were put in local hotels for the night. Investigators were shocked by this gruesome accident and couldn't figure out how this happened. They believe Igor didn't follow the safety protocol and was standing too close to the engine when it sucked him up and killed him instantly. There's a CCTV video of the situation that went around on social media showing the whole situation unfolding. This is a terrible accident and sounds made up, but believe it or not, situations like this had happened before. Rest in peace to Igor, and what a terrible, terrible death. Frank Hayes, an American jockey, achieved a remarkable yet tragic victory in 1923 in New York. During a horse race, Frank suffered a fatal heart attack, but his body remained upright in the saddle, and his horse, Sweet Kiss, continued running, not knowing his rider was dead, and crossed the finish line first, winning the race. Frank Hayes' death was not discovered until race officials came over to congratulate him on his victory. And he was sadly pronounced dead after the race, making him the only jockey in history to win a race after dying. Frank was buried 3 days later, and the horse Sweet Kiss never raced again and was called Sweet Kiss of Death after this incident. They believe Frank's heart attack was caused by his extreme efforts to meet the weight requirement, as it was reported he went from 142 pounds to 130 pounds in a short amount of time. I can't imagine being at this race and finding out that the man that won was actually dead the entire time. This is extremely eerie, and what a terrible and random death. This is the most disturbing sporting accident ever. In 1991, the Labrathorn race was cancelled due to a horrible skiing accident. Gernot Reinstandler, a 20-year-old contestant, was going downhill at full speed when he suddenly lost control as he was approaching the finish line and then slammed head-on into safety nets at extremely high speeds. This then trapped one of his skis inside the net, which resulted in his leg almost being completely torn off. He then begins spinning out of control with a trail of blood following him, staining the entire mountain. His body then stops at the bottom of the hill as a pool of blood forms around him and people come over to help. He also fractured his pelvis and was literally ripped in half. The impact caused serious internal injuries, fractures, and nerve damage. He was transported by a helicopter to a hospital where he received multiple blood transfusions. But despite receiving blood transfusions before and after the operations, he passed away from severe pelvic bleeding. This is just awful, and what makes it worse is that there's a video of the whole situation unfolding on the internet. Rest in peace to Gernot, and what a terrible, terrible accident. Alex Bessler and one of his friends were on a morning hike in the mountains of Arizona when out of nowhere a large swarm of hostile bees attacked. Alex, who was 23, was overtaken by the aggressive bees and was stung over 1,000 times. Several people attempted to help Alex as he laid on the ground completely covered in bees, withering in pain and screaming. But every rescuer's attempt was driven back by the angry swarm. The county sheriff, Sergeant Alan Romer, finally used a utility vehicle to get close and was able to move Alex onto the UTV and remove him from the scene, still covered in bees and the swarm chasing them. Alex was then taken to a local hospital where he was sadly pronounced dead. His friend, however, was able to escape the bees and seek shelter in a nearby restroom. Sergeant Romer, who was stationed in the area for 16 years, said it was by far the worst bee attack he had ever seen. He was also stung a lot, but not nearly as much as Alex. I am completely terrified of bees, so this whole story just gives me complete chills. I can't imagine getting chased by a whole swarm of bees and getting stung thousands of times. Rest in peace, Alex. This was just an awful death. In 2018, neighbors noticed 83-year-old Dorothy Mae Neal hadn't been seen in a couple of days. After a couple more days, neighbors began worrying that she died in her home. So they knocked on her door, but there was no response. Police were then called, and when they arrived, they noticed droplets of dried blood outside her home. They then made their way inside and found Dorothy lying on her back on the ground. Dorothy was naked and badly beaten. She was also covered in blood. She was then taken to the hospital where she died. There was evidence something strange happened as used condoms were found next to her body. And a lamp was broken, covered in blood, and was used to smash her head in. 14-year-old Tyrone Harvin, who Dorothy used to watch, was responsible for this. The condoms were tested, and Tyrone's DNA was a perfect match. His blood was also at the crime scene. Tyrone sexually assaulted Dorothy in a number of ways and hit her so hard with the lamp that she had multiple fractures to her skull. Tyrone was helping Dorothy with chores when he attacked and forced himself on her, taking advantage of an elderly woman. He was sentenced to life in prison for this awful act. In Japan, a school teacher named Yumi Tanaka was about to make the most disturbing discovery of her life. At around 5 p.m., right before she was about to go home, she decided to use the bathroom. When she entered the cubicle, she noticed something she never saw before. Inside the toilet bowl was a black shoe. Yumi then decided to investigate further and stuck her head inside the sewer tank. And what she discovered scarred her forever. Inside the tank were a pair of human feet. She then screamed and her coworkers came running. Police came and discovered the feet were connected to a full body inside the tank. The body was difficult to move, and firefighters and a crane had to assist in moving it. The body inside was 26-year-old Niyaki Kana, and he was covered in feces, and his cause of death was hypothermia. He was dead for 3 days, and he got into the toilet pipes voluntarily and squeezed inside to spy on girls using the bathroom. This is absolutely disturbing, and can you imagine going to the bathroom and then finding somebody inside the toilet looking at you? In 2022, a call was made by a woman named Sheila Fletcher claiming her daughter Lacey Fletcher had passed away while her and her husband were out for the weekend. And in no time, the police and ambulance arrived at their place, and what they saw might be the most horrific thing ever. Lacey Fletcher, who was 36, was found half naked and fused to the couch in her own feces, urine, and maggots. She also weighed only 96 pounds. Her body was completely melted into the couch. Doctors claim she was sitting on the couch for 12 consecutive years without moving at all. Lacey was a very cheerful person until 9th grade when she decided to be homeschooled. She had multiple mental illnesses including autism, Asperger's, and social anxiety. She also had locked-in syndrome, a condition when the entire person's body is paralyzed except for their eye muscles. Her parents neglected her condition and let her rot to death. She was kept starved and ate sofa foam as bite marks were found on the couch, and they found sofa foam in her stomach during the autopsy. This is the couch Lacey was on for 12 years straight, and the most shocking part is that her parents would sit on their own recliner, which was just a few feet away from the couch, meaning her parents were accustomed to the condition, atmosphere, and the bad odor. Her parents also claimed Lacey chose to never leave the couch, but how could she? Her parents were sentenced to 20 years in prison for this awful and disturbing crime. In June 1997, Billy Bob Harrow Jr. got extremely lucky. Let me explain. He became a multimillionaire overnight after winning the $31 million Texas lottery jackpot. This was amazing, especially since before he won this, his life was full of financial struggles, and he, his wife, and 3 children battled every day to make ends meet. So winning this changed the family's life. Billy quit his job and took the family on a trip to Hawaii and generously donated to his church and helped out friends and family. However, not everything was perfect. You see, Billy's newfound wealth led to a lot of his old friends and peers asking him for money and help on a daily basis. This forced Billy to change his phone number, and things just kept getting worse. His life began to slowly unravel, leading to him separating from his wife. On May 22, 1999, just shy of the 2-year anniversary of his big win, Billy Bob Harrow Jr. sadly ended his own life. Billy had expressed his unhappiness to a financial advisor shortly before his passing, and he said, "Winning the lottery is the worst thing that ever happened to me."